China reports slowing economic growth, but there are signs of improvement. 7 people are sentenced to 10 months in jail for perverting the course of justice. And thousands are seeking review of their rejected applications for the consumption vouchers. Hello and welcome to TVB News. China's economy edged up 0.4% year-on-year in the previous quarter, but actually contracted in the 3 months ending in June compared with the previous quarter. But the government said a stable recovery is underway, with businesses reopening in the wake of COVID lockdowns in Shanghai and other cities. Daniel Rao tells us more.
Official data showed China's gross domestic product in the April to June quarter grew by just 0.4% from a year earlier. This is the worst showing for the world's second largest economy since a 6.9% contraction in the first quarter of 2020 due to the initial outbreak of the pandemic. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, GDP fell 2.6% in the second quarter from the previous quarter. This comes after antivirus controls curbed activity in Shanghai and other major mainland industrial centers in late March. This sparked concerns that global trade and manufacturing could be disrupted as millions were confined to their homes, thus depressing consumer spending. Factories and offices were allowed to start reopening in May, but some economists believe it could take weeks or months before activity returns to normal. Other experts have speculated China may miss out on hitting the government's 5.5% growth target this year. However, data on June activity, also released on Friday, showed that China's industrial output grew 3.9% in June from a year earlier, quickening from a 0.7% rise in May. Fixed asset investment grew by a better-than-expected 6.1% in the first 6 months of the year from a year earlier. Retail sales also improved, up 3.1% year-on-year in June, marking the highest growth rate in 4 months. The government is promising tax refunds, free rent and other aid to boost business. It will also up efforts to stimulate growth by boosting spending on the construction of public works while ordering state-owned companies to spend more. Daniel Rao, TVB News.
The city's top court today overturned the conviction of a man initially sentenced to 5.5 months in jail for carrying 48 cable ties in a backpack in 2019. Sharon Tang reports.
In November 2019, police were dispersing an unauthorized assembly in Causeway Bay. Chen Chen-kit was arrested for carrying 48 cable ties. He was later convicted of being in possession of instruments fit for unlawful purposes and was given a 5.5-month jail sentence. Chan's first attempt to appeal against his conviction and sentencing was dismissed. The 34-year-old real estate agent then took the case to the Court of Final Appeal. The case was handled by Chief Justice Andrew Cheung, permanent judges Roberto Ribeiro, Joseph Fogg, Johnson Lam, and non-permanent judge Anthony Gleeson. The key issue of the case is the scope of the phrase instrument fit for unlawful purposes under Section 17 of the Summary Offences Ordinance. The section covered 2 categories, namely spear, bludgeon, or other offensive weapons, and crowbar, picklock, skeleton key, or other instruments fit for unlawful purposes. In 1984, a new category covering any wrist restraint was added to the section. The court thinks the interpretation for other instrument fit for unlawful purposes should be limited to instruments fit for gaining unlawful access. Otherwise, it would render the scope of Section 17 extremely wide, turning the section into a thought crime. It added for an instrument falling within the restraint category, there must be an intent to use it for restraining a person. The court added that the 48 6-inch plastic cable ties in question were not manufactured for the purpose of physically restraining a person and are not offensive weapons nor instruments fit for gaining unlawful access. The 5-judge panel therefore ruled that the cable ties fall outside of Section 17 and unanimously overturned Chan's conviction and sentence. The judges also think the Chinese translation does not faithfully follow the original English text of Section 17, so they were guided by the English text.
This particular section was passed in the colonial days. And in those days, the law was passed in English only. Subsequently, there was a Chinese translation. Now, all the court is saying is that if something goes wrong with the translation, and since the Chinese version was not the version passed by the legislature, therefore you should rely on the English version.
Sharon Tang, TVB News.
12 fugitives were intercepted in mainland waters during their escape to Taiwan back in 2020. 7 of them have been jailed for 10 months each today. Jackie Lin with the story.
A landmark case in Hong Kong's history, where suspects attempted to flee overseas to escape prosecution were convicted of perverting the course of justice. That's according to Deputy District Judge Newman Wong, who handed a 10-month jail term to the 7 fugitives who pleaded guilty to the charge. They were among the 10 people extradited back to Hong Kong after being arrested by mainland Coast Guards during their attempt to escape to Taiwan between November 2019 and August 2020. 2 members of the 12 fugitives, Tang Ka-yin and Queen Moon, are still serving time on the mainland. In sentencing, Judge Newman Wong says their preparations were worked out in great detail over the 6 months leading up to the failed escape bid, noting the case's seriousness due to the unusual amount of manpower, logistics, and funding involved. Wong says while no evidence suggested the defendants were masterminds behind the scheme, they had actively participated in it, such as in the search for funding. The judge says, most importantly, the Fugitives Act has been a contemptuous and deliberate challenge to the city's legal system, and that has set this trial apart from other bail-jumping cases. Judge Wong adopted a starting point of 18 months in jail for the 7 defendants. But considering they have pleaded guilty and were already in custody or imprisoned for 4 to 7 months on the mainland, the judge handed them a jail term of 10 months each. One of them is 32-year-old Li Ziyin, whose jail term would run concurrently with the sentence he is already serving for rioting. He has to serve time for a total of 4 years and 1 month. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Hong Kong reported 3,574 new COVID infections today, which is 100 cases fewer than yesterday's tally. The city is on a 3-day streak of reporting over 3,000 cases. Meanwhile, authorities fear a communal spread involving school bus drivers has emerged in Kowloon Tong's St. Catherine International Kindergarten.
St. Catherine International Kindergarten, the driver will be driving different buses, and in one of the buses there are 2 students and a nanny who tested COVID positive, and there could have been some transmission on board the bus. We haven't picked up any transmission in other classes or in other buses. Probably there was some community transmission, and the drivers themselves would be eating together.
Starting today, people trying to enter the mainland through the Shenzhen Bay port must first go and undergo an online booked on-site PCR test. If the result is positive, the infected individual will immediately be sent to quarantine before undergoing more tests. Timothy Lee has the story.
This morning, the once endless lines outside of the Shenzhen Bay port have shortened drastically. Signs in the area reminded visitors to show proof of their PCR test reservations. Workers on the premises said the reduced lines meant they can produce test results in just 1.5 hours. Visitors waiting for their PCR tests can also rest inside the pre-booked quarantine rooms. This man said the entire process ran smoothly, and it only took less than 15 minutes. This man stayed at the quarantine hotel nearby and said no one notified him about the new measure. But because of the low numbers turning up to the Bayport, they managed to get their PCR tests performed quickly today. Beginning yesterday, authorities arranged designated vehicles to take people who tested positive to quarantine facilities. Those with COVID-positive results are required to wear red bracelets and wait inside the blue tents. They will then be brought to Penny's Bay to be quarantined. The Center for Health Protection said the infected people will be tested again at the quarantine facility. But people who are found to be re-positive will not need to undergo quarantine. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
The government has received 4,000 review applications from those who were denied the second installment of the consumption vouchers. Many of the applicants had previously withdrawn their mandatory Provident Fund contributions, but later moved back to the city and were therefore deemed ineligible for these vouchers. Jesse Wong, head of the Budget and Tax Policy Unit of the Financial Secretary's Office, says applicants who have since returned to Hong Kong can apply for a review via email or mail with supporting documents. Such documents include rent records or credit card bills. Wong says the authorities will adopt a lenient approach in handling the appeals and will try to notify the applicants of their review results within 6 weeks. Chief Executive John Lee said he attaches great importance to the development of innovation and technology in Hong Kong and that his government will actively promote innovation. In an event organized by the Hong Kong Alliance of Technology and Innovation today, John Lee pointed out that it's essential for Hong Kong to follow the mainland's innovative trend. The HKATI today announced a Technology and Innovation Prize to motivate the local development of artificial intelligence and financial technology. Coming up after the break, in Sri Lanka, acting president has been sworn in after days of chaos. Donald Trump's first wife, Ivana, dies at the age of 73. France celebrates Bastille Day as troops march down the Champs-Élysées. Welcome back to TVB News. Ranil Wickremesinghe has been sworn in as Sri Lanka's acting president, one day after strongman Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigned. Though many Sri Lankans celebrated Rajapaksa's exit, they still want to clean the country of politicians they hold responsible for the country's dire economic crisis, Wickremesinghe included. Nazvi Karim reports.
These were the scenes in Colombo on Thursday night when it was announced that Sri Lankan strongman Gotabaya Rajapaksa had resigned as the country's president. The celebrations marked a victory for people power after a week in which tens of thousands of Sri Lankans raided Gotabaya's residence and offices, as well as those of the former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. For the protesters, though, it's only step one of an overall effort to rid the country of the leaders they believe led Sri Lanka down the path of economic doom. They blame Rajapaksa and his powerful political family as the country faces a crippling economic crisis in which basics such as food, fuel and medicines are in short supply. Along with this man, Wickremesinghe is a long-time Rajapaksa ally and today was sworn in as acting president. Previously, he had vowed to step down once a new government is formed.
So I think at this point in time, there are early celebrations at Galway, obviously with the knowledge that Gotabaya will soon be going home. But at the same time, there is also some sense of frustration and anxiety in knowing that he's being replaced with someone who is equally problematic.
Speaker of the Parliament, Mahinda Yapa Abewardena, said in a press conference today that Rajapaksa had submitted his resignation on July 14th by email from Singapore, where he had fled to after protesters stormed his offices and residence. Parliament will meet on Saturday to start the process of electing a new president who would serve out the remainder of Rajapaksa's term, ending in 2024. Abewardena expects the process to be done in 7 days and urged Sri Lankans to respect the democratic process. Rajapaksa and his wife slipped away early on Wednesday to Maldives aboard a military plane. On Thursday, he went to Singapore, according to the city-state's foreign ministry. It said he had not requested asylum. After last week's mass protest, a curfew had been imposed in the capital, Colombo, and the military has warned that it had the power to respond in case of chaos. The nation is seeking help from the International Monetary Fund and other creditors to restructure loans worth more than $50 billion. But even Wickremesinghe said recently that the country's finances are so poor, obtaining a bailout would prove difficult. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
The U.S. House of Representatives has passed an annual defense policy bill with provisions to reinforce the partnership between Washington and Taiwan. It also supports Taiwan to join a U.S.-led military exercise in the region in 2024. The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023 was passed by 329 yes votes and 101 no votes. Democratic Representative Ami Bera stressed the need to strengthen ties between the U.S. and Taiwan and its deterrent measures against Beijing. China has always opposed relations between Washington and Taipei, saying that would only lead Sino-U.S. relations into dangerous territory. President Xi Jinping has been visiting Xinjiang from Tuesday through Thursday, making his first trip there in 8 years. On Thursday afternoon, Xi stopped by Grape Valley and Turpin to get to know the local fruit and tourism sector. He also went to Gaocheng District, inspecting the village revitalization and cultural heritage protection efforts. He inspected the Museum of Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, a quasi-military organization established in the 1950s to help develop the frontier region, and he visited a historical artifact fair in Xinjiang's capital city. Xi had earlier said Xinjiang was important in the Belt and Road Initiative. U.S. President Joe Biden continued his Middle East trip by arriving in the West Bank and Palestine today before heading off to Saudi Arabia. Biden arrived for talks with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in the biblical town of Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. The U.S. president is expected to announce some $200 million in additional assistance to the Palestinians after pledging $100 million to hospitals that serve Palestinians in East Jerusalem. While voicing support for a Palestinian state, Biden is not expected to float any new diplomatic initiatives during his visit. Biden was also due to visit Saudi Arabia. Though the U.S. has a measured approach to Riyadh, Washington wants to build better relations given Russia's war with Ukraine and its effect on energy prices. Former U.S. President Donald Trump will reportedly announce he is running for the top job again as early as September, and he's been seeking support in political and business circles. The development came as Trump's first wife, Ivana Trump, has died in New York City. She was 73. Ivana was a competitive skier from the former Czechoslovakia who later gave birth to 3 of Trump's children. This report from NBC News.
In the 1980s, they were one of New York's power couples, the brash real estate mogul Donald Trump and his glamorous first wife, Ivana. Tonight, the former president announcing her death, calling her a wonderful, beautiful, and amazing woman who led a great and inspirational life. Her pride and joy were her 3 children, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric. She was so proud of them, as we are all so proud of her. Ivana Trump grew up under communist rule in the former Czechoslovakia. As a child, she was a competitive skier, later fleeing to Canada, then New York, where she met Mr. Trump, becoming a prominent New York socialite and an executive at the Trump Organization, working on key projects like Trump Tower in Manhattan and managing the Plaza Hotel.
You're working as a team, and you're working on the same thing. Donald owns it, and I own it. We own it together.
Managing one specific diamond like the Plaza Hotel, I don't think there's anybody better.
She would later become a fixture in the tabloids during the couple's very public divorce in 1992, even making a cameo in the movie The First Wives Club.
Don't get mad, get everything.
She said recently she was on good terms with Mr. Trump, saying they spoke once a week.
It's been a very sad day, guys.
In a statement tonight, her family writing, "Our mother was an incredible woman, a force in business, a world-class athlete, a radiant beauty, and a caring mother and friend. She will be dearly missed by her mother, her 3 children, and 10 grandchildren."
Russia has been accused of war crimes after missiles struck a Ukrainian city far behind the front lines, with officials saying at least 23 people have been killed. Ukraine's national police said the missiles hit an office building and damaged nearby residential buildings in Vitnitsaya, southwest of the capital, Kyiv. The missile strike ignited a fire that expanded to engulf 50 cars in an adjacent parking lot. Officials say the Caliber cruise missiles were fired by a Russian submarine in the Black Sea. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky strongly condemned the attack. Meantime, France celebrated Bastille Day on Thursday with thousands of French troops marching down the iconic Champs-Élysées aside allies from Eastern Europe. Troops from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary were assigned the front position, bearing their national flags. The traditional parade also featured warplanes, military vehicles, and a drone to show off France's might and its efforts to support Ukraine amid Russia's ongoing invasion of the country. Bastille Day commemorates the storming of the Bastille prison in 1789, one of the key events of the French Revolution. The day has become a national holiday in France. That's the news. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend ahead. Good night.